Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kira Gets Real Estate. Get it? I'm so glad you're here joining me on my podcast. Today, we're going to talk about value, which I think is something that everybody to some degree thinks they know about, something that lots of people want to know about, but is very very often misunderstood. So before I go there, I just want to give my caveats. I am not an attorney. I am not a CPA. I cannot give tax advice or legal advice. And if you're working with another real estate agent, then you have an agency relationship with them. And so I cannot answer questions about a specific situation where you're represented by another party. So don't ask. But if you have a real estate related question or, want to know what my favorite food is, you can go on my website, which is witherwax.com, and go to the podcast tab. There is a button to send us a question. I would love to answer your questions. So please send those in. First off, I have to sort of throw myself under the bus. So you'll notice, maybe you won't, but I notice I have like eczema on my eye right now, people. This happens to me. Dairy hates me. I love dairy. If I could eat one food for the rest of my life and not have this happen to me, it would probably be cheese. But dairy feels differently. I was at a client appointment, first time meeting them. They offered me tea from their homeland prepared in that special way. Of course, I said yes. I love tea. It arrived. It was sort of like a chai formula made with milk. And I really felt as though I could not turn it down in that moment. And believe me, it was absolutely delicious. However, 3 days later, this is what happens to me is when I eat dairy, then I get eczema and it itches. And for some reason, it is like, not on my leg where no one's going to see it. It's always on my face. So I apologize. That's that piece. So value. I think all of us have kind of seen on social media lately, whether it's a meme or a reel, where they talk about, like water at a gas station is worth this much, at a concert is worth this much, at your friend's house, it's free, blah, 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 right? And in this example, you are the water bottle. And it's always saying, if someone isn't valuing you enough, it's not you, it's them, it's the situation. A bottle of water is worth different amounts in different spots, right? So now we're all standing in front of our mirror in the morning and saying, I am a bougie amusement park bottle of water. You are, for sure. So a little bit similar situation with your house. There are different ways to value your house. And sentimentally, it may be worth millions to you, but that might not be what it's worth to a buyer or to a lender or to an appraiser or to the tax guy. So it's really important to know who is valuing the property and for what purpose, because it's not that one of them is right and the others are wrong. It just depends on the situation. So there are 3 general values that come across in my business in real estate. So the first one is the appraisal, the tax assessed value, and then the CMA, which is the comparative market analysis. So we're going to start with the appraisal. And you'll notice if you listen, the general public often confuse the terms because they don't have a reason to know the difference necessarily, right? But a perfect example is I had somebody call me the other day. They asked if I could do an appraisal on their house. And the first thing I have to say is, well, I can't do an appraisal because only an appraiser who is licensed to be an appraiser can do an appraisal. But what is the purpose? Why are you asking to have an appraisal done? What I can do is what is called a comparative market analysis. That's the process I use if I'm going to list a property for sale to give you an idea of what I think it would sell for in this market. So in this situation, the homeowner was looking for a value because she had somebody who was interested in purchasing her house. And they said, can you get a professional opinion of value? And they actually gave her my name. So they were looking for what I valued the property at, basically. So they said, call Kira, see what she thinks it would sell for, and then I will offer you something for your house. That is definitely like a service that a real estate professional can provide. And typically in this, like, for example, in this situation, there's a small fee for that. And I told her if he doesn't buy your house and at some point you decide to list your house with me, then that can be a credit towards the fees you pay to list your house. But because in this situation, my purpose was only to determine a value, and then they were going to take it from there. They were going to have their attorneys handle the closing. I was out of it. So even though she was asking for an appraisal, what she actually was wanting from me was a comparative market analysis. An appraisal is done in a real estate transaction when a lender is involved. So the lender wants to confirm that what you're paying as the buyer, because that is their asset that they're giving you money for. They want to make sure that they're not overpaying, right? That they're not giving you more money than it's worth. So the appraisal is done to sort of confirm that for them. So the lender hires an appraisal, the buyer pays for it. And depending on what type of mortgage you're getting, it either has to be 100% of the purchase price or sometimes it's less. That's dependent on the lender and what type of mortgage you're getting. But the appraiser's process is to look at what has sold recently in the marketplace and compare your property to those sales. And they also look at like how long did those other properties sit on the market before they sold? Is your property being sold for its best use? So for example, if you have a colonial 3-bed, 2-bath house, but somebody is buying it for some other use other than a primary residence, like maybe they're buying it to have an insurance agency there. I don't know, right? But that's probably not the highest and best use, meaning that's not going to give it the most value. So that would potentially affect the appraisal price. That's not often what we see. Usually it's residential real estate being sold to residential real estate. Another situation where an appraisal is often needed is in a state situation. If the attorneys need to determine value on a specific date, an appraisal is done. And it's similar. Well, the purpose is exactly the same, actually, as cost basis for like if you own stocks, bonds, mutual funds and pass away, the attorneys will need to know exactly what the value was on the day the person passed away to establish cost basis. The appraisal in a estate situation is for the same reason. And so for these reasons, or sometimes also in a divorce situation, actually, same reason, division of assets, they need to determine a value on a specific date. So in these situations, an appraisal is needed. It can't be a different form of value. And an appraisal gives a specific number. So they say, we value your house at $387,000 and that's it. It's not a range. It is very specific. As you can tell from the examples I gave, it needs to be specific. They have to have one number. You'll get a very detailed report. They'll give you the houses that they use to compare it to. You know, they look at square footage, number of bedrooms, school district, all of those things. And so that is very useful for those purposes. So an appraisal is typically very accurate for that moment in time, right? Because it's determining value on one specific day. At that day, in theory, it's market value, right? Almost always the value that we as the real estate professionals come up with is very in line with what the appraiser comes up with. Not always. That's probably a whole other conversation about what happens if it doesn't meet appraisal, but that's a podcast for another day. So I'll often have people say to me, oh, my house is appraised for $247,000. Oh, my house is appraised for $150,000, yada, yada. Almost always. What they mean is it's taxed assessed for $250,000 or whatever the number is. So I would say appraisal and assessment are the two that are most commonly confused in terms of flopping the words around. They are very different. An assessed value, so that is also determined for market value, right? The town assessor is the one who computes this value. They have a formula, a computer program that they have to enter the data into. It's a very, again, precise program. It takes into account bedrooms, bathrooms, similar sales, all of those same data points. However, because it is so rarely updated, it's not very accurate. It might be incredibly accurate at one point in time, but the real estate market moves faster than an assessor can keep up with, right? It's one person for hundreds, maybe thousands of houses. So they are not changing assessed values every time the market moves. And sometimes that's good for you as a homeowner. If the market goes up and your assessment has not gone up yet, that benefits you tax-wise. However, what we typically see then is they do a town-wide assessment to kind of catch up to the market, and you get a big change in value. And everyone calls me that lives in a certain town and says, oh my goodness, they raised my assessment this much. And is that even possible? And I could never sell my house for that. And they said, if you come look at it and you can tell me that it's not that, and that would benefit me. Like, I'm happy to come look. I'm happy to tell you what I think. I'm not going to lie. So if I think that you could sell your house for what your new assessment is, or maybe even more, that's what I'm going to tell you. And you don't have to tell that to the assessor. That's just what I'm sharing with you. I say, if I do my research, see your house, and I say, no, I really do think that is higher than I could actually sell your house for, then I'm happy to write you a letter saying, this is what I came up with for a value, and you can do what you want with information. And I would say, honestly, it's probably about 50-50 how it comes out. Like, there are definitely plenty of times where I do my process and I say, good news, bad news. I think your house is worth more than they assessed it for. And there's just as many times where I'm like, oh, I think you might be right. I think you have a case here. It seems like they assessed you a little high. So it can work both directions. The opposite is also true in terms of being nimble with the value. So when I first got into real estate in 2014, we were like coming off of the major financial crisis of 2008 still. So there were a lot of houses that were actually assessed for higher, substantially higher than we could sell them for. Because what had happened is it had taken a bit of time and the towns caught up with the values, and then the market reversed and they never reduce them. I know that shocks you. So, we did have a lot of people that would grieve their assessment or have an appraisal done to try to get their assessment reduced based on the new market. But it would be oftentimes very disappointing for homeowners if they called us to, come and look at their house to potentially sell it. They're thinking, my gosh, my house is assessed at $500,000. This is wonderful. And then I walk in there and say, yes, but recent sales show that it probably won't sell over 375. That is not a fun conversation to have. So that is why we don't really look at assessed value in terms of the real estate market, in terms of buying and selling, because it's just not updated fast enough to keep pace with the real estate market. Also, an important point of clarification, I'll have people say to me, oh, the assessor raised my taxes. That sentence is not accurate. Now, are they related? Yes. But the assessor has no control over your taxes. They don't raise or lower your taxes. Taxes are percentage based. So now they are percentage of your assessed value. Yes. So if your assessed value is higher, will your taxes be higher? Yes. But they don't actually raise or lower your taxes. And in a perfect world, which all of these things involve humans, so there's no such thing. But in a perfect world, if everyone's assessed value were accurate and they took the tax percentage to figure out what the tax burden is across all homes, and then everybody's went up, it actually wouldn't change the amount of taxes you pay, because if, say, for easy numbers, the tax burden for a town is $100,000 and you divide it amongst the homeowners, if everybody's values went up, it would require a smaller percentage to cover the tax burden. In theory, if the assessed values are accurate, your tax burden shouldn't go up substantially unless the total tax burden goes up. Unfortunately, sometimes we do find that maybe your assessment hasn't changed in 20 years. And that's, that is where you start to see the discrepancy and people get angry. But in theory, it's percentage based, so it shouldn't actually have such a negative impact. And the assessor cannot change your taxes. They just can change your assessed value. And there is a process to grieve your assessment once a year, so you can go through that process with your town. So the third way to determine market value is the comparative market analysis, or the CMA, which is what your real estate professional, so myself as a licensed real estate associate, this is what I do. So I come in, I look at your home, see not just the bedrooms and bathrooms, the square footage, of course, the yard size. Is it level? Is it up a mountain? Do your neighbors have a giant pile of garbage next door? Right? I look at the details of your house, and then I go back to my office and I compare what's sold recently, which in some places, mostly not here, like they can pull comps, which are comparable sales, from like a quarter-mile radius and have in like the past 3 months. We don't live in that world. we don't have enough sales and we don't have enough comparable sales to do it that way. So our process, like I say, a CMA is art and science, right? So the science is the data piece of it. It's the, okay, if you have a subdivision and this 3-bedroom ranch sold for this, that 3-bedroom ranch should sell for that too. The data part is easy. We can all pull data. The art of it is where you really find that experience helps and knowing the different communities helps. Because, for example, well, in our market, there are just very few subdivisions. It is mostly unique homes. And so it's interesting for me, like as I've developed my team, my process, I just sort of did it. And to have to teach someone else to do it, it really makes you learn a lot about your process. Like I was like, oh, that's why I did that. So I know more about it now than I did before, which is great. What I do, if you say, Kira, we're looking to sell our house, I come see it, chat with you, see what your house is all about. I go back to so for me, highest and best use. For me, what I look at is, okay, what buyer is going to pay the most for this property? Sometimes it's a buyer looking in that school district, somebody that really wants to be in this school district in a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath colonial. That is the buyer that's going to pay the most. Somebody else might look at it. Somebody else might buy it. But that buyer that's school district specific and needs that many bedrooms, they have limited options for those criteria and they're to pay the most. Sometimes it's not school district. Sometimes it's single floor living. Like if I have a really cute ranch that I think is probably going to be somebody downsizing, they don't care about school district, right? That person is probably going to pay the most for it. Now, are they going to buy it? I don't care. We might get first time buyers. We may get somebody with 6 kids. All of those are fine, but somebody that's specifically looking for that type of property is probably going to pay the most for it because they aren't finding it somewhere else. A big one that I get, because I would say about half my business is in Essex County, and a big one that I see is a property that has lake views or a property that has 11 acres with 8 acres of woods. That type of unique property, lots of people would be interested in that property, but the person that's going to pay the most is somebody that specifically wants privacy. So I tell you all of this to tell you that when I go searching for comparables, that's where I start. I start with, okay, homes in Essex County with 7 to 15 acres, right? Or homes in Peru School District with 3+ bedrooms, or ranches in Clinton County, or ranches from Plattsburgh to Keysville. These are where I'm coming up with my comparables. I have more flexibility in my process than an assessor or an appraiser. Now, they may say, that's not good. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I'm the one who is meeting with buyers every single day. So I am the most qualified to tell you what buyer behavior is telling us. Now, do I want to give a price that is going to be supported by an appraisal? Absolutely. Because if I list a property for a price and a buyer is willing to pay it and the appraisal comes in short, that helps none of us. But ultimately, I want to give my seller the most accurate value of what I think a buyer is going to pay. And so that's why I'm looking at buyer behavior. What is a buyer choosing this home for? Is it because of the subdivision? Is it because of the school district? Is it because of the style of home? Is it because of the privacy? So that's where I start my comparable search. Sometimes I have to go beyond that to find more data. I'm looking at usually homes that have sold in the past year. Sometimes I even have to go further out than that. And then it gets real art driven, because if you're going, okay, I'm going back 2 years or 3 years if it's super specific, in a unique way. I mean, and not only are you going like, okay, is this a comparable, but what was the market like then? What would that have sold for if it sold in 25, not 22? Like, it just is a whole lot more. Obviously, the more you have to sort of adjust the data like that, the more room for error, for sure. But when we have unique properties, a lot of times that's what we're dealing with. And that's a conversation I have with my seller is, look, I was able to find 3 sales in the last 3 years that come close to what this really cool, unique property you have is. And we have a conversation of, you kind of want to start here and see what happens? Do you want to play it more safe because you have to move next month? That's their decision. I provide the data. I also look at what is currently under contract, meaning the seller has accepted an offer, but it hasn't closed yet. And I look at what is active because a potential buyer that is looking at your home is also looking at those properties that are active, right? You are not in competition with the buyer. The buyers are in competition with each other. If they are looking at your home and another one, you want to be more appealing, right? And you're competing as a seller with other sellers. So that's my process. Like I said, I have more flexibility. Buyers don't use data to buy houses. And honestly, if you get a buyer that's only looking at data, they probably will never buy a residential house. Buyers buy with emotion and justify it with logic. They will say, I need a 3-bedroom house, and then they'll buy a 2-bedroom house because they fall in love with it, and they'll they'll add on a bedroom. And that's okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That means that you are comfortable there. That means you feel at home there. That's a really good reason to buy a house. I digress. So my process allows for, is the layout really weird in the house and you can't really change it in an easy or economical way? Does it smell bad? Like, is there an odd odor? Does it smell like cigarette smoke? Does the neighbor have a giant pile of trash in their yard? Those types of things that maybe show up on appraisal, probably don't show up on assessment, are giant factors for buyers. Another thing is cosmetic updates. And I tell my sellers this all the time. Buyers are very easily distracted by the cosmetic updates. So they put value on that. They are much more likely to buy your house for more money than a different house if yours is cosmetically pleasing. And an appraiser, they will definitely say, they'll mention in the report if it's like really dated or the finishes are high end versus low end. But just from knowing the public and personally working with a lot of buyers definitely care if it looks cute. There's no doubt about it. And they put value to that. So our process allows for the most flexibility with that. And in my opinion, the most truth of what the buyers are actually going to see and pay for. But like I said at the beginning, all of the values are valid. They're all useful and they all serve their purpose. It's just important to know what they're being used for. And then, of course, there's the homeowner's value. They think, not all of them, but lots of them, if you've put your blood, sweat, and tears into something, if you have memories there, often you have this sentimental value, which is wonderful. And you can take your memories with you, and that's wonderful. But that sentimental value is not transferable to another person. So it's important when you decide to sell your house that you look at it through the perspective of a potential buyer, not through your, rose-colored loving lens, because there's a reason you're moving, right? So that's okay. And someone else hopefully will love it and make their own memories and have a similar sentimental value, but they're not going to pay you for yours. So that is my super long-winded version of value. If you have specific questions and do not currently have an agent, I'm happy to answer them. If you would like to submit a question on my website, it's witherwax.com. I'm happy to answer it on air. If you want to, email me, call me, text me. I am happy to let you pick my brain. I'm happy to come take a look at your property. There's no pressure to commit to me long term, but sometimes you just need more information to make a decision. So I'm happy to do that. Don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you all have a fantastic day.